Our brand new series My Way starts in 35 minutes here on ITV1 Wales. Now though, for King and Cardiff.
Ninian Park, a Cardiff landmark, where every other week thousands of fans watch City battle it out on the famous old ground. There are now plans to move the team to a state-of-the-art stadium nearby, and the name Ninian Park may fade into history. With it, the story of Lord Ninian Crichton-Stuart MP, one of the Bute dynasty who helped create Cardiff City Football Club and who made the ultimate sacrifice. He died here, hundreds of miles from Wales, in the trenches of the First World War, cut down by a sniper's bullet as he led his Welshmen at the height of the battle.
He was completely prepared, and along with quite a number of other soldiers, religion became very important to him when he was in France. And as he said in the final letter to my grandmother, you know, it's in God's hand what happens. I'm prepared and I'm at peace. So yes, he was ready for whatever happened.
Tonight, using his private diaries and letters, we tell his remarkable story as his granddaughter makes a pilgrimage to the place where he died, bringing soil from Ninian Park, which his generosity secured for Cardiff City. Cardiff is enjoying a renaissance. Tiger Bay has been transformed with millions of pounds of investment. The skyline is dominated by cranes and new buildings. 100 years ago, Cardiff was also booming. The bay was full not with cafes, but coal trucks. Wales exported coal to the world, and South Wales prospered on the profits.
No era in Wales was as golden as the period before 1914. If you're a Welsh historian like me, your nostalgia is before that pre-1914 period. I often think, you know, last thing at night going to bed, if I had one wish could be fulfilled, I would like to have come to Wales in 1913. I'd like to have arrived by train in Cardiff, gone up to the valleys. You know, Wales then was at its most exciting.
At the heart of the city is the magnificent castle, once owned and restored by the Bute family. The second Marquis had put Cardiff on the map when he spent a fortune transforming the docks. That transformation continued under the third Marquis. These were good times, as Welsh coal made the docks the busiest in the world.
The Butes were the great boosters of Cardiff. They wanted Cardiff to be a great city of empire. They wanted Cardiff to be like, you know, Glasgow, like Dublin, like Calcutta, like Cape Town. You know, Cardiff was planned in that sort of way.
The second son of the third Marquis was Lord Ninian Edward Crichton-Stuart. As the second son, he would not inherit the fabulous wealth of his elder brother and needed an income. For a while he was an officer in the army. But when his children were born, he resigned his commission, but remained a reservist. The charismatic young Ninian had other ambitions.
I didn't really know very much about him when I was a little girl, though there were quite a lot of pictures of him. And of course you never ask any relatives until they've died because you're not interested at that stage. But I'm the member of the family who's the nosy one. Some people called him the absolute charmer. People said he could charm the birds out of the trees, that he had a common touch and that he could make anybody feel at ease. So I think he was someone also who had a huge sense of humour, a sense of fun, but also a very strong sense of duty.
And that sense of duty drew him into politics. In 1907, he became Tory parliamentary candidate for Cardiff, Llantrisant and Cowbridge, finally becoming MP in the election of 1910.
I don't think, if you look at them, that they'd be Tories in, you might say, the crass commercial sense. They were Tories in the paternalistic sense. The businessmen grind down the faces of the poor, but the aristocracy were kind to the poor. This is the kind of theme he's developing, and that would be very much in tune with the traditions of the Toryism that the Bute family had embraced ever since the time of the second Marquis.
As the city prospered, there was money and time for recreation. This was the Riverside Cricket Club.
In 1899, Riverside Cricket Club wanted some activity during the winter months, and the secretary of Riverside Cricket Club, Bartley Wilson, decided to form a football club. Didn't get much support at first, but gradually people became involved, and they became Riverside Football Club, playing in local parks leagues. In 1902, 3 years later, they combined with Riverside Albion, and over the next few years became one of the strongest clubs in the area.
Cardiff was growing rapidly, becoming a city in 1905. The football club too had big ambitions.
They looked round various sites and eventually decided on this area, which was in fact part of the corporation refuse tip. They needed several guarantors of the rent to Cardiff Corporation. There was problems in the coal industry at the time, and a number of businessmen who had connections there who had become involved. One or two of them pulled out. Time was getting on. They needed a set number of guarantors, and Lord Ninian, who was always interested in anything to do with the city of Cardiff, came in at the last moment to make up the number of guarantors of the rent.
I think he was generous to a fault, and he was very keen on sports and people having good health. And of course he was parliamentary candidate as well, so all of the things put together, and he had the finances or got them, and so I think he was probably only too delighted to help.
As a mark of gratitude for his generous gift, which secured the ground, the club named the new pitch Ninian Park.
I don't think that football was particularly his number one sport. He was very keen on motoring as well, and there are some interesting pictures of him in vintage cars driving along. But there's a very amusing photograph of him kicking off the first ball at Ninian Park, still wearing his bowler hat and really doing a bit of a rugby kick rather than a football kick.
I think the club needed credibility to become a professional force in the game, and the fact that they'd got somebody like Lord Ninian on board, even though he wasn't actively involved, it was of great help to the club.
The club would go from strength to strength, but Europe was hurtling towards war. The main powers, Britain, France and Germany, were arming themselves, and soldiers were put on a war footing.
The First World War was one of those wars which was waiting for an excuse. We had two large power blocks in Europe, both of which had been arming steadily. And there was a feeling of really of war mood, that all it needed was a spark somewhere.
That spark came in 1914. The First World War had begun, and Britain was at war with Germany. As a reservist, Lord Ninian volunteered. He would command the 6th Battalion, the Welsh Regiment. The entire battalion, drawn from Swansea and Neath, volunteered for service at the outbreak of war.
People were educated into that sense of Britishness. In schools, they looked at the Atlas. In schools, they were taught about India and Africa and the civilizing British notion. So when the opportunity came to go to war, and everybody in 1914 thought it would be a short war. Everybody thought that this was going to be a brief moment of glory, that people would all be home, by Christmas, and this would be yet another example, of British destiny. But things would be very different.
Instead, the war would rage across the continent for 4 long years. Lord Ninian thought that his battalion were going to India, but in October 1914 they were ordered from their camp in Swansea to France. On parade there, Lord Ninian, a devout Catholic, told them it is the greatest honour to give one's life for one's country. Their motto was better death than dishonour. Within days of this picture being taken, the Welshman would be in France, on the Western Front.
In the living hell of the trenches, with death all around, Lord Ninian kept a private diary. It's a chance to glimpse the man behind the title.
When he was walking along a road in northern France, and some fellows greeted him, and he discovered it was soldiers making a road who he had known in one of the pubs of Cardiff, and they greeted each other like long-lost friends. So I think that he knew people of all classes, but he had the common touch that he could put people at their ease and didn't stand on ceremony.
In France, the Welshmen found themselves performing vital but mundane duties. They saw some action, and because their casualties were light, they earned themselves the nickname the Lucky Six. But that luck was about to change. On their arrival in France, the Welsh had sung the national anthem, followed ominously by the hymn Nearer My God to Thee. The Welshmen were about to be sent into the carnage that was the Battle of Loos.
Available to anyone. Detailed Bupa health checks. To find out more, visit bupa.com. Bupa. Feel better.
Individually selected king prawns in aromatic herb and Sicilian lemon oil dressing. Succulent, outdoor-bred Lincolnshire pork and sage sausages from an authentic family recipe. Mint-sprinkled halloumi with fennel wedges, courgette, and sweet cherry tomatoes. Extra large, extra sweet, hand-picked fresh cherries. This is not just food. This is M&S food.
Rhythm in the street, yes, the rhythm of life is a powerful thing.
Disculpe, ¿ese es su carro?
Sí, ¿es ok?
¿Qué se siente manejar ese carro?
Así. Get a lot more than you'd expect from Ford this summer.
When is a good deal not a good deal on car insurance? We asked a cross-section of motorists.
When they let you earn a no-claims discount, but not your partner or kids.
At Direct Line, we don't just give great prices. We let named drivers earn their own no-claims discount.
Better.
When you're not rewarded for being a loyal customer.
At Direct Line, we offer an extra discount when you insure your second car.
That's better.
When they've got a flashy website, you can't speak to anyone. And rents? Hey, sorry.
And we not only have great online deals, we're also on the phone here in the UK waiting to help.
That's better.
Direct Line. A good deal. Better.
Movement. Only when you truly understand it can you create extraordinary fuels. Shell, made to move.
Round, round, get around, I get around. The Beach Boys. Sounds of Summer. The CD and DVD collection. All their hits on one CD. With a great bonus DVD of classic Beach Boys moments. It's the real sound of summer. The Beach Boys, Sounds of Summer. Out now.
As you can see, babies really, really love delicately soft clothes.
Comfort Pure, unbeatable softness for you and your baby.
Here's our new fireball of energy.
A new recruit.
Cheers. Early days yet.
With good intentions.
Barry! I know. No, will come to me.
Sorry, get down. It reflects badly on you if she doesn't work out.
But testing patience. Barry! Where the Heart Is, Sunday at 8, ITV1.
By late 1915, war had been raging for a year. The 6th Battalion of the Welsh Regiment were in France, hungry to see action. So too was their commanding officer, the MP for Cardiff, Lord Ninian Crichton-Stuart. The men were restless, and there was no immediate sign of them going to the front line. But Lord Ninian had brought footballs with him to keep the men busy. Ninian Park must have seemed a world away as he watched the men play soccer. But football was about to become a distant memory. As summer headed into autumn, a major offensive was being planned by the British. It was to be called the Big Push. The Welshmen were ordered to take up positions near the French town of Loos, which was now in German hands. This was a mining area, and the pit heads and the slag heaps must have reminded the Welshmen of home.
The Battle of Loos was fought in September 1915, and it was a British contribution to a bigger French offensive. And the British Commander-in-Chief, then Field Marshal Sir John French, was persuaded to attack at Loos in order to extend the front of a French offensive. Sir John French didn't much like the battlefield when he first saw it, but was persuaded to attack there against what I think was his better judgment.
On the first day of the battle, 8,500 British troops were killed. The battle was on a knife edge. The Welshmen prepared themselves to be sent into the slaughter. It was time for the men to make their peace with God.
I think he was completely prepared, and along with quite a number of other soldiers, religion became very important to him when he was in France. And so he was very pleased to have been able to go to church, to have communion and to have confession several days before his death. So he was spiritually prepared, and as he said in the final letter to my grandmother, you know, it's in God's hand what happens. I'm prepared and I'm at peace. So yes, he was ready for whatever happened.
After 16 hours on the road, the weary Welsh were sent to the frontline trenches. The second bloody phase of the Battle of Loos was about to begin.
What then followed was what I'd call a broken-backed battle, where there was not going to be a decisive gain by either side. And both sides were sort of fighting desperately to gain or retain small parts of the line. And a particularly important part of the line, which is towards the northern end of the battlefield, is a feature called the Hohenzollern Redoubt. And you'll see that actually it dominates the whole of the northern part of the flat and generally depressing Loos battlefield. The British had taken the Hohenzollern early on, and the Germans were straining every nerve to get back the Hohenzollern itself and two trenches called by the British Big Willie and Little Willie on either side of it.
In the heat of the moment, Lord Ninian tried to rally his men. He stood up and was heard to say, "Stand steady, Welsh, stand steady." For 2 days, Lord Ninian had refused to take any sleep while his men were in action. The fighting was intense. As the Welshmen tried to evacuate their trench under withering fire, Lord Ninian put his head above the parapet to check the progress. As he raised his head up, he was immediately shot down.
What I've got here is a letter written by Lieutenant Lionel Frisbee, who was in the 6th Welsh, and at midnight on the day that my grandfather was killed, he wrote a letter to my grandmother. She would have had a bit of early warning because he had sent a telegram saying, "Very sorry, am writing Frisbee. So that's how my grandmother knew that my grandfather had been killed on the 2nd of October. And then this is the letter where he gives all of the information about what happened and what they were doing with the body. The regiment and the 1st Battalion took a trench last night, and this afternoon the Germans made a counterattack, and we were forced to retire through lack of bombs. Our supply had gone. As the men were coming back, the colonel put his head and shoulders over the parapet and shouted to them. He was then shot straight through the head and killed instantly. The only thing we can thank God for is that he felt no pain. What we shall do without him, I do not know. He was the best man that ever lived. We would... It is too dreadful for words. The body is still in the trenches and cannot be moved yet, as there are so many wounded who have to be brought down. I've made arrangements with the Padre, who is a great friend of his, that if he can be brought down, he should be buried in the British cemetery in the village. Yours sincerely, Lionel Frisbee.
They're obviously very fond of him, aren't they?
It's funny, I know it's 90 years ago, and I never knew him, but he was my grandfather. And it is quite upsetting, but it's nice to come back to where he was.
200 of Lord Ninian's men died with him at Loos. The next day, the battalion was pulled back.
You can see from things that people wrote afterwards that my grandfather was loved by his men and he equally loved them, so it was a kind of mutual. And people said that they would do anything for him, that they would follow him wherever he led. But as it says in another cutting, he was one of the British officers who would say, "Come on," rather than "go on." And although he was a professional soldier, he had found the months in northern France just doing lines of communication very frustrating, because he and the men, all they wanted to do was to get into the fighting. And it's ironic that really on the 2nd day of the battle, his first battle, that he dies.
Incredibly, Lord Ninian MP and another commanding officer killed in action were featured in a pamphlet encouraging other men to play their part in the war.
It was part of that feeling of this being a nation right across the board, rock bottom at war. This isn't just part of a nation getting sent off to do its country's bidding. This is the whole community going. So the war was a social mixer, and many middle-class men who'd served as officers wrote about that afterwards and said how remarkable it was to have met people who normally would have been objects of suspicion or disdain to you.
He was very keen to do his best for people, and my grandmother kept all of the letters of sympathy after he was killed, and when you look through them it's very touching, because it's people who he might never have spoken to, but who felt that he had affected their lives and that he was working to try and make things better for them. So I think he touched the lives of a lot of people in Cardiff.
He was interested in anything to do with the city of Cardiff. For example, rugby. He used to attend rugby internationals. As I said, he attended the occasional football match. But he continued to show an interest in things that made Cardiff a higher profile. There is a reference to his death in the boardroom minutes of late 1915. He was still a guarantor of the annual rent at the time, and his solicitors wrote to the club to ask if the executors could be released from the guarantee, and such was the financial state of the club at the time that the directors regretted they couldn't release them, so even after his death he was still involved.
Lord Ninian's men were devastated by his loss, and they paid a heavy price in the Great War. Of the 842 men who left South Wales with him, by the armistice in 1918, only 30 of the original contingent remained. 90 years on, and Ninian Park still stands. although it's likely his men would recognise very little else of the city they once passed through on their way to war.
It's a strange name, but when I stand on the terraces at Cardiff City Football, I reflect, on the Butes and on Ninian. It's a historic Cardiff name, and it's right that we should remember the role of the Bute.
Cardiff City has ambitious plans to move to a new state-of-the-art stadium, but will Lord Ninian's name move with them?
I think perhaps we could stick with Ninian Park. He is, after all, a fine Brythonic saint. If you go to southern Scotland, you can follow the trail, the pilgrimage trail following Ninian. He's as good a saint as you can get, so let's stick with him.
No decision on a name for the new stadium has yet been taken.
I feel quite strongly that the building's been called Ninian Park for over 90 years, that the person who represented that constituency fell for his country, leading men from Cardiff and South Wales, so I would hope that it will remain called as Ninian Park.
Lord Ninian's granddaughter has brought Cardiff City to France. She scatters soil from the Ninian Park pitch on the spot where he was killed. This corner of a foreign field will be forever Cardiff.
Next on ITV1 Wales, an insight into what made people such as jazz musician Jeff Hooper successful. Our new series, My Way, starts next.